If I had legs, I'd kick you. The blurb of the movie is, with her life crashing down around her, Linda tries to navigate her daughter's mysterious illness, her absent husband, a missing person, and an increasingly hostile relationship with her therapist. Now, movie blurbs aren't always like the most accurate, and this blurb doesn't feel super accurate to me because the daughter's illness is not that mysterious. I watched the movie and immediately was like, wait, I gotta look this up. Is this an eating disorder movie? The daughter has a feeding tube in her stomach. I would also say, while it is a little mysterious what eating disorder she has, it is mysterious. It's mysterious. It's an eating disorder. It's a mysterious eating disorder. But I would say that she probably has ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. It's characterized by limitation in the amount or variety of food consumed. Unlike other eating disorders like anorexia or bulimia, it's not associated with a preoccupation with thinness and body image, which also, like, based on the movie, we don't really know if the daughter has a preoccupation with body image. She very well could, but to me, it felt like ARFID. It's a eating disorder, and I'll give it to them, a mysterious eating disorder. It's a mysterious eating disorder. But I thought that the movie was very much, the food was a theme throughout the movie. It was not just the daughter's eating disorder. And I'm going to talk about the motif of food and world food relationships in this movie. And then I'm going to talk about kind of why I don't think it's rare to have an eating disorder movie that is not advertised as such. So I want to talk about this trend and why it's happening and kind of what I make of it. And I really like this movie. So this is not a takedown. It's going to be, I'm just talking about what I saw. And I really like it. I think they did a great job. I also think that it is going to win an Oscar. I predict, at the very least, Rose Byrne will win the Oscar for Best Actress. I'm usually not right about these things, but that's what I think. I'm going to put that out in the world right there. All right. So the movie is obviously about motherhood and a mother who's trying to balance so many spinning plates that she has to drop some, and the number one plate that she's dropping is her own mental health. And it's not just about Linda as the mother, it's also about Caroline, who is one of her patients, who is a mother constantly talking about her newborn baby. She has a preoccupation with his face and what his face is up to, and I think that kind of parallels in an interesting way the fact that we don't see Linda's daughter's face for most of the movie, which I thought was such an interesting choice. I'm digressing a little bit, but it really makes you sympathize with Linda more. I mean, if you saw this cute kid the entire movie, you would empathize with that kid a lot, but the way that they did it in the movie, the kid is not humanized. She's the way that it feels to Linda. She's this voice and this task to her, to both, oh, kitten, are you okay, Eve? She's just this voice and this task to her, which is how she feels to Linda. Linda's not really fully seeing her and processing her as a person because she's too wrapped up in all of these plates that she's balancing. And I do say plate on purpose because this is a movie about food. With motherhood, I mean, I think, not all mothers birth their children, but birth is a task associated with motherhood. This scene here is the scene of the feeding tube being put into the daughter's stomach, but it so looks like a birth scene. I think this is so beautiful. It's talking about this association with being a mother and birthing your child and the responsibility to nourish them and feed them and keep them alive. Those things kind of go hand in hand. Like a child who is traditionally birthed by a mother would be traditionally breastfed or, otherwise just fed because it's your child and you have to keep them alive. And I think having Eve, come on, Eve. it is common for when these procedures happen for the mother to be present and to try to like calm her child down or to take care of the child as she's getting this feeding tube installed. This is not an uncommon thing to happen, but it's such a beautiful, like the way that it's filmed. You could look at it and be like, wait a second, is this a birth scene? But no, of course she's got the daughter in her hands and the daughter is getting her feeding tube installed. So I thought that was such an interesting like parallel, and it shows how inseparable feeding is from motherhood in the film. That's something that they're trying to talk about. The It's Not Your Fault cake, this little shame cake, it's a cake that it's responding to the fact that all of these mothers, and note everyone in the room taking care of their kids at this shame meeting is a mother and not a father. And all of these mothers are, made to feel shame. That's a very common phenomenon, right? The mother is being blamed. The mother is often blamed because she's supposed to be demonstrating good food habits for her kid. And if her kid is not eating properly, maybe this has been her own failure. These are not things that I believe should be associations. Obviously, they're at this meeting to try and say, like, no, this isn't your fault. And you can also note that at this meeting, Linda fills her plate up with multiple donuts, which is a way of showing that not that Linda has an eating disorder, but that Linda's associations with food are linked so deeply to emotions, to shame, to her own like mental health. And you can see that in these pizza scenes when Linda says she drops the pizza and the cheese falls off the pizza, and she asks her daughter, like, are you magical? Did you do this on purpose? And oh god, test. Okay. How do I speak again? Oh, are you magical? You didn't want cheese, and now the cheese is off the pizza. Like, did you do this? And it's kind of a cute moment. And the mother is kind of not making time for herself to even sit down and put cheese on the pizza and eat a real slice. She's eating this cheeseless pizza, and then she's shoving the cheese in her mouth. And again, I'm not trying to say that this is an eating disorder, but it's a relationship with food that isn't ideal and isn't healthy and is related to emotions. And another example of this emotional relationship with consumption is, of course, Linda appears to have an alcohol problem. She's drinking a lot of wine. She's drinking a lot of cheap wine when she's at the motel. And when she can't buy the wine, she buys a bag of Reese's Cups and then kind of eats the whole thing very emotionally. So there's a lot of like emotional eating shame, eating stress. And then Caroline, the other mother in the story, who's Linda's patient, she is constantly stressed out about her new baby. It looks like some kind of postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis. And she has these like kind of psychotic ideas about her child's face. And she abandons her child. She runs away because she needs a break. And when she runs away, Linda calls Caroline's husband. And Caroline's husband is like, yeah, she could be, in the bathroom or at the vending machine, which it's a small moment, but it's showing you, it's pointing at food as a source of shame. And also, these negative associations with food as a way of calling someone a bad mother. And I think that kind of keeps coming up, is the association between food and shame and food and motherhood. That line didn't have to be there, but it's this husband's association with eating and negativity and being a bad mom. A big climax is this horror-inspired scene in the movie when Linda finally pulls out her daughter's feeding tube, like against the recommendation of the child's doctors. Dr. Spring. It's a nice name. Spring. Rebirth. So there's this horror-inspired scene of pulling out the feeding tube. Thematically, it can be seen as a way of Linda wanting to take on the responsibility of feeding her child again, because she feels like that's something as a mother that she ought to do, which is a fallacy. She shouldn't think that. Obviously, like medical intervention is a good thing when her daughter needs it. But, we can't blame her for feeling that way, because it's part of the shame. It's part of the shame of having a sick kid. It's part of the, fallacy around, like, I should be able to feed myself. I should be able to feed my daughter. Like, food is something that we should be able to do. It's fundamental. In my inability to do it, I feel shame. So we can't blame her for feeling that way. So I think like food comes up a lot in this movie as an image, as a theme, as a plot device, as the quote unquote mysterious illness. And yet it's not mentioned in most of the... Eve, are you okay? And yet it's not mentioned in most of the blurbs about the movie and most of the advertisements about the movie. And I've been really putting a lot of thought into why this is. And I think eating disorders are really hard to depict in media. Obviously, a lot of addictions. So an eating disorder is not an addiction by definition. So those things are different. But in what do you want? What are you doing? What's going on? You need something? Do you think this is thematic? What's up? Okay. So I put a lot of thought into why I think eating disorders are so hard to depict in media. I think, potential glamorization or romanticization, how do you say that? Romanticization are obviously always issues when it comes to depicting these things that, it can be glamorized, but are these addictive behaviors, which is a category that I'd put eating disorders in, and addictions, alcoholism, drug addiction. And I think, you have a responsibility when you try to portray them to not create a media that's promoting those behaviors. On the other hand, I also put eating disorders in a category like portrayals of OCD in media. Future me just wants to add that I have no right to be putting things into categories. I'm not a medical professional. I just mean for the sake of having something to compare it to. So comparing it to another mental illness that I see in media. One of my favorites being Turtles All the Way Down by John Green, which does a really good job of avoiding a lot of the pitfalls of portraying these kinds of mental illnesses. But I do think, despite these comparisons, eating disorders seem to occupy their own special category of very hard to portray. Eve, we're done with the bit. If I really narrow it down, it's because different from OCD, or in a more severe way than OCD possibly, eating disorders have a really strong element of social contagion. Social contagion is when modeling it, consuming it socially through media could lead to potentially becoming sick with it. Addictions have an element of social contagion, but there's a slower onset with drugs and alcohol, probably because there are more barriers to that. You can't just independently become an alcoholic because you watched it on TV. You might glamorize performances and habits associated with it. So putting the liquid into the wine glass, it's predisposing you to an addiction to drugs and alcohol, but obviously the barrier is acquisition of the substance in order to get addicted to it, whereas eating disorders are performed in and of themselves only on the body. Modeling restrictive behaviors is dangerous because it can be done as a direct response to seeing it depicted, to reading about it. You could just become restrictive without any other steps. This glamorization leading to the onset of an eating disorder, especially in young audiences, was one of the criticisms of the very popular modern eating disorder movie from 2017, To the Bone. I think it's important to consider this in order to create responsible portrayals, but while it's important to consider, it also might be impossible to completely avoid. What is a perfect, unharmful eating disorder? story? What does that look like? Is it possible? Ultimately, I think If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You does an amazing job at the story it's trying to tell. And I think the advertising without the mention of eating disorders is a big part of why it's a successful movie. I think producers would much rather produce a story with the tagline of a woman on the brink is trying to keep it all together while all these different threads of her life unravel than they would ever touch a story if it had an eating disorder as a central part of the pitch. And I'm not faulting them for it. I think that's why it's successful. Not like the one reason why it's a great movie, but like I think leaving that out was a successful producing tactic, was a successful advertising tactic, and it makes me ask the question, is this something we're willing to show but not talk about and not engage with? Is that helpful, or is it part of the problem? Eve! Are you purring for the people?